In this demo, I'm going to talk about filtering on Excel tables. This is actually part one of a two-part demo, the next part being on building an interactive dashboard in Excel. So let's go take a look at that dashboard, and then we're going to talk about the filters that we're going to create. Okay, so here we are on the completed interactive dashboard. What I can do is I can select a beginning year. You see here it's 1989. Let's say I make that 1983. Now it goes from 1994 to 1983. And you see that a conditional format, which is a heat map where the greatest value has the greatest heat, you see that that's been created and it's dynamic. It automatically updates based off of the amount of years we select. We can also do the same for the end year. Let's say I make that 1990. Now it's shrunk down, and you see that this table grows and shrinks based off of those values. So that's what we're going to talk about how to build in this part one. In part two, we're going to talk about how to pull filtered aggregations. So that means based off of the years you select, what's going to be presented is the total for quarter one, quarter two, 3, and 4, and those are going to be based off of the filters themselves. So let's talk about how to build something like this. I'm going to jump over here to where it says dashboard example. In B3, I'll type in begin year. Make sure I spell it right. Type in end year over here. And then I'm going to just drag this out just to give me a little bit more room. And here what I'm going to do is use a data validation dropdown. So I'll go to this data tab, select data validation. Where it says allow, I'm going to go to list. And here the source, I'm just going to go back to the data tab. Now, you can't just type in data year here. Excel gets really weird about it. There are ways around that, so you can use the table features in this list, but we won't deal with them at the moment. Sometimes it's just easier to do something quick and dirty, and I think it's allowed here. So I'm going to hit OK, and it's always a good idea to test. So let's see here. I'll select 1953, and then I want to do the same thing here. So I'll select C4. Under where it says allow, I'm going to click list. Under source, I'll go back over here, and then we'll just start back at the top. So that's B2 here, Control Shift down, goes down to B46. I'll hit enter, and now we have the same thing. So maybe I'll just hit 1989 here. Okay, so if we want to use these values over on the table, and the fact that we do, we should name them something good. So what I'm going to do here is in cell C3, I've selected it. I've now clicked into the name box. I'm going to type in dashboard dot begin year, or let's make it smaller, BEG year. So dashboard.beg year. Let's move that out of the way so you can see it. I'm going to hit enter. Then I'll go down. We're going to do the same thing here. Let me hit escape on that. Dashboard.end year. That's why I use BEG, because I like how END is the same amount of characters. So just to make it easier, I'm going to hit enter here. So now we have dashboard begin year and dashboard end year. Now, to begin building the dynamic that you saw on that dashboard, we need to start at the table. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in year filtered. And I'll hit enter, and you see it added a column to the table. And in this case, when the year over here on the left is within the range described by beginning and end year, I want this column to return a 1 or a 0 or a true or a false. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in AND, because we have two conditions we need to satisfy. Remember, AND requires everything inside the AND to be true to return a true, or only requires one thing inside of it to be true to return a true. But here we're going to use an AND, and what I'm going to say here is that the year, so in this case I can do B2, so I'll just select that. It's going to come up with at year, and I'm going to say that is greater or equal to, so caret right equals, then dashboard dot begin year. And then next, what I'll do is the same, but I'll test it differently, right? So what does that mean? I'm going to do a year again, close the square bracket, and I'll say is less than or equal to dashboard and year. And I'm going to close that parenthesis and hit enter. And you see that it came up with false, true, 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 true. Now notice that is the range, I should say, of the years selected. Now what we want to do is understand that filtered range. So the easiest way to understand that filtered range is to pull out the years associated with it. So what I can do, if I want to get the years associated with it, I can say year filtered returned. I like that better. And you notice that I take things like year, and I say year filtered, and then I say year filtered returned. Whatever naming convention you use, just make sure that you're not being arbitrary. Don't do year filtered returned 1. Try to keep it to following what you've done. So here I have year filtered returned. Now I can do this very easily because I have a true and false dynamic. That means I have a 1 and 0 dynamic. So what I can do is I can say equals. I'll select the year in this case, and then I'm going to multiply it by that filtered variable we just created, the filtered field, I should say. I'm going to hit enter, and now you see it goes 0, 0, and then it goes all the way down until there are other zeros. So when it was false, false means 0, 0 times any value is 0. When it was true, that means 1, 1 times any value is the value. So now I have a problem, because if I go back to my dashboard example, and if I want to set it up in the way that I set it up in the complete, so let's see here, I put year on B6, so I'll put year here, and total tornadoes here. Let's say I wanted to pull data from this column. Well, the problem is I have all these zeros, right? So I don't actually care about those zeros. I care when it starts at 1953. So there needs to be a way around that. And there's a lot of complicated ways around that. For instance, I could count the zeros in this list and figure out where to pull from. We can get very complicated, and sometimes we need to get complicated. But this course is about doing things quickly and effectively. So I'll tell you the easiest way around this. The easiest way is to use large, because what we can do is, instead of showing the order from 1953 to 1989, we can go from 1989 to 1953, and then if we use large on this, all those zeros are going to be at the bottom because they are inherently less than the year values. So let's do that. So I'll type in years sorted descending, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the large function. I'm going to do that on the year filtered returned. So that's this one right here. Open square bracket. I start typing it in. I see it's right here. I'm going to select it. One easy way to select it is just hit tab, close that square bracket, hit the comma, and now what I'm interested in is the index. So here, square bracket, we're going to use the @ sign in this case because we wanted to use the value at this record. I'm going to close that out. I'll close the parenthesis and I'll hit enter. So now it goes from 1989 to 1953, and now all those zeros have been moved to the bottom. So this here, this 1989, all the way to the zeros, this is going to represent what we would like to return. So what I'm going to do over here in cell A7 is type a 1, and then A2, or I should say A8. I'm going to type a 2, and I'll drag that down. We have 45 different values here. So I dragged it down until there was 45. You can see that count right there. It goes from 1 to 45. So I want to return those sorted year values. So here's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to start in cell B7. I'm going to type in equals index, and then I'm going to get access to the table, the database we have in the back, by typing in data, open square bracket. We want to pull the sorted year list that we just created, so that's year sorted descending. If you don't remember, feel free to jump over here and take a look and remind yourself. Nothing wrong with jogging your memory. Close that square bracket. We're going to hit a comma here, and now we're going to select the row number of what we want to return. So that's going to be in the first spot. We drag this all the way down. It's going to go to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Now notice, I'm going to close this out, hit enter. We're not using an Excel table here because we don't use Excel tables on the front end. We use them on the back end. So I have this here. It's 1989. I'm going to double click this. You can see that it goes all the way down, and it also has those zeros, and we'll take care of those here soon. But let's just make sure our dynamic works. So if I go back up here and I select 1989 and I change it to, let's say, 1992, this changed in 1992. and we see that there's fewer zeros here. Now what we need to do is return the total tornadoes at 1992. Now there's multiple ways to do this. In earlier module, I discussed thinking outside the cell, where instead of doing an index match, you could figure out that range. The range is from 1950 all the way down to 1994. You could figure it out that way. I think here we're going to just use an index match dynamic to pull back the total tornadoes and not deal with doing fancy math, because I think it's easier to follow here. So I'm going to do equals match. What we're going to need to do is match 1992 back into the year list. And again, like I said, we don't necessarily need to do this because 1950 to 1994 doesn't have any skips in it, so we could figure out where 1992 is on the list by subtracting it. We don't need to do any of that. So we'll do B7. We're going to go tell it the lookup array. That's going to be the original total tornadoes list. So I'm going to type in data here, total tornadoes, close that out. We're always going to be using a 0 here. So that's going to give us the row number that we want returned. But now we're going to have to match that into an index. So what I'm going to do here is add a space. So you can see I clicked into the front of the formula. I'll type in index here. And then I am going to use the total tornadoes column. So we're going to say data, total tornadoes, close that here. Now sometimes when you do that, it's going to replace what the match that was there. So it did here, so I'll just have to retype it here. So just notice that that's a common error that happens. Don't freak out if it happens. Just know that it's something that can happen when you're doing this, so look out for it. So I'm going to close off this formula. I'll hit enter. And what I did here is, in this initial match, I had it look in total tornadoes. What I should have had it do is look into year. So I'll hit enter. Great. So what it did is it found 1992 within the year list, and then it took where it found that and pulled out the total tornadoes at that record location. So I'll double click this. We'll scroll all the way down, and we see we get some NAs here because there was no match, which causes an error, and we're trying to do an index on that. So I don't really like these NAs. We're going to add just one additional function here. It's called the Iferror. We can put an Iferror around it like this. I'll add a comma, and then I'm going to do 2 quotation marks. So what this means is that if this formula here results in an error, then just return quotation marks, return nothing. So I'll hit enter here, and then we got to go over the whole formula again. We'll scroll down. We see that these are now blank. That makes me feel a lot better. It makes me feel very relaxed. Okay, so what we want to do next is apply the conditional formatting to this list. So let's just go ahead and do that because it's super, super easy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the Home tab, and I'm going to click on the Conditional Formatting drop-down, and I'm going to click New Rule. Now, this top rule that starts out, format all cells based on their values, that's the one we want. Excel's kind of weird here. In terms of data visualization, you would expect the lowest value to have more intensity versus the highest value having less intensity. So this is actually incorrect from data visualization standpoint. So make sure we want to change this. So the minimum, in this case, we are going to use the lowest value. And the reason we're going to do that is because we put quotes here instead of putting a 0 on that if error. If we put a 0, the 0 becomes the lowest value. So putting quotes there is going to allow Excel to treat it as a blank and not as a value. So as it does conditional formatting, it's only going to do it on the list of numbers and not blanks. So we like the 2-color scale, but we don't really like the colors. What I'm going to do here is I usually pick the light end of any of these verticals. So let's take this. Blue is always a good looking one. I'll pick the light end there. And under the maximum value, I'll pick something that's second to last or last, just depending on how many I have. So I'll hit OK here, and you can see it automatically colors everything. That's kind of cool, huh? And we can actually filter this however we want. That's 1953 up there. Let's say we turn it to 1959. You see that it actually shrinks, and then 1957, 858 becomes the highest year. So the next thing we want to do is actually get rid of all these zeros from showing up. So what we can do here is actually also use conditional formatting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this whole column range like so. And I'm going to apply its own set of conditional formatting on it. So what I'll do is I'll go to New Rule, Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to go click on this last one. It says use a formula to determine which cells to format. So we're going to want to use a formula. In this case, the formula is going to be, well, does the cell in question equal 0? So what I can do is I can hit equals, and I'll do open parenthesis, and I'll select cell B7, and I'll type in equals 0. Now, if I hit OK on this, it's not going to work, because what it's going to do is it's going to go through each cell, and all the while, it's going to test out if only cell B7 equals 0. So I'm going to click in here like you would do on the formula bar, and I'm going to hit F4. Now you see it lets you go through each rotation of holding on to either the column or the row. I'm just going to make it loose, so we're going to just say B7 with no absolute references. And what's going to happen is in B7 it's going to say, does this equal 0? No, it does not. Don't apply the formatting. Then it's going to move to B8 because it's always going to move down through the selected area. So it's going to move to B8 and say, does this equal to 0? No, so don't apply the formatting. When it hits B14, it does equal 0, so apply the formatting. So what do we want to apply? Well, we don't want it to actually show anything. So what we can do easily here is say, when it's true, make the color of it white. That's an easy way around it. I'll hit OK. I'll hit OK. And there you go. It disappears. So let's just double check that our dynamic works. Let's say we add another year to it, like that. Maybe add another year below. Like that. And we see it actually works and it looks good. Now, what about this set of numbers here? Well, we don't really care about it. I'm going to highlight it. I'm just going to make it white too. So I'm going to just move this over here, make it a little bit nicer looking, go to View, and remove the grid lines. And then I always like to demarcate filter interactivities, any sort of interactivity. I like to put some type of box around it just to let you know. You can color these if you want, make them lighter or darker. Really, that's up to you. Always kind of a good idea to let your user know. Now finally, I like to make values of tables. The header should always be right aligned. We'll make this bold. And then I'm going to add a little bit of a soft border underneath. So there we go.